Come on.
They're right there!
Let's go. Move, 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 move. This episode of Choices Not Chances podcast is sponsored by Louisiana Gun Shop, located on Highway 90 West in Broussard, Louisiana, just south of Lafayette. For more information, stay tuned at the end of this episode. This is Choices Not Chances podcast with Ryan and Matt. I'm your co-host, Matthew Charette. Sit next to me is Ryan Rogers. Ryan.
All right, guys, welcome back. And just like every other time, if there's something that you see on this podcast that resonates with you, that you think needs to be shared out to the greater community, we ask you to do that. Don't be selfish with it. Share it to the people that it needs to be shared to. Tonight's special guest coming on is Lieutenant Colonel retired Wayne Phelps. He wrote the book On Killing Remotely, The Psychology of Killing with Drones. And being that drone warfare is just about everywhere right now, plastered all over your news stations, from, the Ukraine conflict and different conflicts going on around force design. For those of you in the Marine audience out there, drones is a big deal. It's a big conversation right now to be had. And so I picked up the book. I read it. I loved it. And Wayne's been generous enough with his time to meet up tonight and make this happen. I really appreciate that, sir. And thanks for coming on to the show.
Well, thanks, Ryan, for having me. I'm really looking forward to our conversation.
As am I. So I basically have a little structure of questions that I'd like to get, kind of pick your brain on a little bit. And it just kind of starts out with, where were you born and raised, siblings, mother, father, household, religion, that kind of stuff. We'll just start with where you came up and where you were at in the pecking order.
Okay, yeah. So I'm an only child, so no siblings at all. I grew up, was born and raised in Midwestern Illinois, near Macomb, Illinois. When I was 10, I moved down to Southern Illinois, just north of St. Louis, and spent the rest of my formative years in the St. Louis area. Went to college, university there at St. Louis University, and commissioned in the Marine Corps right after that.
Right on. And both parents in the household?
Yeah, my dad was a single father for about a year. My parents divorced around the time I was 10, and then they remarried, and my stepmom adopted me at that point. So, but yeah, both parents in the house for the most part.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And what about religion? Was there religion in the household at all when you were younger?
Yeah, I went to vacation Bible school in the summer times. Went to church on Sundays.
Right.
Religion was really big with my grandparents as well. Kind of grew up Baptist.
Sure.
And I would say that kind of slid further and further away from religion the further removed I was from my grandparents. So by the time I was a teenager, it wasn't a big part of my life. And I went to a private Catholic college, and religion was there, but it wasn't at the forefront of my life at that point. So,
Roger. And then Marine Corps really probably didn't aid in that, with op tempo and things of that nature following on, huh?
No, it didn't. But you always kind of revisit things that were important to you in your youth. So it's
sure.
Definitely come back. So.
Outstanding. And in the time coming up, were you in sports or recreational activities, things of that nature?
I was, yeah. So I played baseball since I was 5. Played on the varsity team my sophomore year, junior and senior year in high school. Played competitive basketball for about 4 years, and then I moved to a larger school where the talent pool was a little greater than what I was used to, and didn't make the team. Couldn't play football. I was, scrawny
Size fish in a bigger pond.
Yeah, pretty much. So I stuck with baseball. I was pretty good in baseball. Didn't play any competitive sports in college, but played a lot of intramurals. And I've always enjoyed that.
Gotcha. Yeah, I find it. I have my kids as well coming up, and we all try to do this the first time on our own, like figuring out how to be good parents and how to, try to give your kids the best possible start, and I feel like competitive sports is a big thing. I think it's a place that you grow. I think the coaching is a lot of my coaches I've looked at as mentors throughout my life, a good deal of them. And I think there's a lot to be said there. And then, it's where you really start to lead those peers for the first time and leading people for the first time in those young, even intramural or recreational sports. You're learning how to deal with other people. And so I find that necessary. And it seems to me, and most of the people that I interviewed that were sound leaders later in their life, they had that in the beginning. And so pretty wild. And so what about, so you joined the Marine Corps, but what was your catalyst to your service? Was there a catalyst, or was it get out of Dodge, or?
Yeah. My relationship with my father when I was in college was a little contentious, and I was looking for a way to get out of the house. I always wanted to travel, see the world. Grew up kind of fairly poor. We didn't travel. We didn't have the opportunity to do that. I didn't fly on an airplane until I went to OCS when I was 19. So Marine Corps paid for my first airplane ticket. So. Yeah. So I wanted to get out of the Midwest and wanted to see the world. I joined before 9/11.
Mm-hmm.
I went to OCS in 95 and 96, and then commissioned in 97. I came on active duty in 98. So I had a few years of times before 9/11. So it was,
Sure.
It was definitely interesting to see see the Marine Corps then, and see it definitely pivot after 9/11.
Pivot and evolve into the war machine. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we were always the war machine, but
Just wasn't active.
yeah, definitely.
What you said something right there that piqued my interest. Okay. So you said the catalyst was just kind of getting out of there, but what makes you choose the hardest of all the service branches?
I think it was the challenge, right? I mean, we're all kind of attracted to the commercials initially, the person in a cool uniform fighting a dragon, or whatever it might be, right? So um, I had an uncle who was in the Marine Corps in Vietnam. My grandpa was in the Navy in World War II. My great grandpa was in the Army in World War I. My cousin joined the Marine Corps. He was a year younger than me, but he joined right out of high school. So he was coming to the end of his service about the same time that I was coming in. So it was, it was in our family. I had another cousin in the Navy as well. So it was, it was kind of in our family. And I just wanted the challenge. I thought the Marine Corps had the reputation of being the best, and, I wanted to be part of that.
Sure. Yeah, well, I mean, that sounds like a family business the way you put it right there. You got enough family to fill a small platoon at least.
Yeah, at least a squad minus, right?
Yeah, hey, let's go. All the way through. All right, so you commission and you come in. Where's your first unit?
My first unit, I was at 3rd Lad Battalion, Camp Pendleton.
And so your first unit, you pick up your first unit was at 3rd Lab Battalion?
Yeah, 3rd Lad Battalion out at Camp Pendleton.
And what are we doing? What's our op tempo, our training schedule, that kind of thing when you pick in?
It was so it was pre 9/11, so we were doing a couple of CAX exercises a year, a couple of WTI exercises. So the op tempo was, it was pretty significant, but it was mostly training, and then we would send small detachments out on MEUs. So those were the opportunities you had to deploy back then. Was if you wanted to, get close to the fight or have the potential to get into the fight, you had to go on a MEU. So I spent some time as a platoon commander, did a bunch of training, spent some time working in ops after that, and then volunteered to go on a MEU. And I was on the 15th MEU. I left San Diego on August 13th, 2001, and we were in Darwin, Australia, just wrapping up some training with the Aussies on 9/11.
That's what I was going to ask you. Was so That's probably I've talked to multiple guys that were in on the podcast when it happened, and they said it was almost a surreal event. What was it like when you guys got news of it, or were you able to watch it?
Yeah, it was surreal. It was probably like 9:30 in the evening over there, and it was our first day of liberty. So you can imagine what Marines and sailors were doing.
Mm-hmm.
It was there was a lot of boozing going on.
Getting
It
it
was,
in.
yeah, and I was on the phone with my wife back in California, and she was living with a couple of my a couple of my peers that were lieutenants in the unit, and one of them came in and said, "Hey, you got to turn on the TV." So she's kind of walking through play by play of what's happening. And I said, "Hun, I just got to go. I think we're going to get recalled and something's about to happen here." So, sure enough, went back up to the hotel room. The entire MEU got recalled, and we kind of got online and walked through the bar district there in Darwin and just got everybody
out.
Yeah, pulled everybody back. I got back to the ship, and there was a message on my door waiting for me that said, "The MEU commander wants to see you." And I'm a lieutenant at the time. I was like, what does the MEU commander want to see me for right after 9/11? So I go down to his office, and he said, "Hey, with everything that's going on, we think we want to put some Stinger missiles up on the flight deck to defend the ship." And he was like, "What do you think about that?" And in the room, he had the MEU OPSO with him. He had the JAG sitting next to him, who's just kind of shaking his head like, "Oh, this is a horrible idea." And he asked me what I thought, and I said, "Well, this was Colonel Waldhauser at the time, later General Waldhauser."
Mm-hmm.
And I said, "Sir, I think it's a bad idea for a few reasons. First, the attacks are from commercial airliners, and we're probably not going to be able to bring one of those down with a Stinger that's going to prevent it from running into the ship if it's determined to fly into our ship." Said, "Second, what's the rules of engagement? How do we determine when we let a Stinger fly in harbor in a foreign country?" And the JAG is over there like, "Oh yeah, that's a nightmare."
Great point. Yeah.
And then I said, and finally, and probably most important, I should have led with this, is at this hour, I'm going to be hard pressed to find a sober Stinger gunner.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Then what?
Yeah. Yeah. So and he was like, "Okay, yeah, fair point, Phelps. We're not going to go with the live Stingers up on the flight deck." So
just had to get an outside perspective.
Yeah. But we were all trying to figure out what to do, right? It was just so unprecedented, and everybody was in shock. We didn't know, but that MEU, if you're familiar with what we did, we ended up going off the coast of Pakistan, supporting operations right at the start of the war, and we ended up doing the longest amphibious assault in Marine Corps history into southern Afghanistan, into Camp Rhino. So a landlocked country, and we're doing an amphibious assault from the MEU. The 26th MEU joined with us. They put General Mattis in charge of it, made it Task Force 58 under his command, and we just kind of raged there for a little while in southern Afghanistan.
And what did that look like once you were on the ground?
Well, I was in Pakistan, so I set up a forward arming and refueling point.
Okay.
So the helicopters could get all the way up there. And me and my Marines, our role was just to provide security for this FARP. And we had a bunch of Pakistanis that were providing outer perimeter security, and it was really interesting.
Now, the host nation that you're working with, they're tribal, non-Taliban, I would assume, tribal leaders, or?
I mean, they were regular Pakistani military. So
you're working with Pakistani military, okay?
Yeah, Pakistani army. In fact, one of the officers I worked with during that deployment came to Command and Staff College the same time I was there, and we were in school together. And recognized him. It was the strangest thing. Yeah.
Wild. And now, did you guys have any kind of contact holding security on the FARP?
No, not really. The area that we were at was it was in the middle of nowhere, kind of surrounded by mountains on all sides, and it was a tribal area. So the only folks that would come by were local farmers that were just curious and stuff. But
Yeah.
we would, we'd keep them at bay. But there were times where we'd hear gunshots in the distance, but it was, it's probably people that are out there hunting and stuff. So
Yeah.
but what I thought was really cool about being there was at a point later in that deployment, the first two Predators that were armed with Hellfires showed up there, and they were manned by some OGA folks, and they were flown by some Air Force folks back in the United States. And one of the OGA team leaders was a former gunny in the Marine Corps. He took a liking to us, obviously, and he let us come in and watch all the stuff that they do. Yeah. So it was really cool because at the time, nobody knew that we had Predators that were armed, and nobody knew that we were using them to hunt for Bin Laden. So,
and they were armed. What were they armed with that time? Was it Hellfires?
Yeah, it was Hellfires.
Yeah. It's wild. It's the drone thing was just kind of over. I don't know if it was just over my head, if I just didn't notice it until about 2010. Like, I deployed in 06, 07 time frame, and like we had the Ravens and the little throw ISR style drones, but we didn't, like, it wasn't a real big thing. And then when we went into Marja for Operation Mosh to Rock, it was different. There was drones everywhere. You had ISR if you needed it. We had armed Predators that were in zone for us, almost on command if you needed them, at least there for a while. And so I missed the evolution because I just never seen the beginning of it. I wasn't operating in an area where we were using them a whole lot. And then at the end, and even now, past that, reading the book, there's a wealth of knowledge in this book, and we'll cover some of it, guys, but there's just, you got to get on it. There's a wealth of knowledge. If you need to know anything about the remote piloted aircrafts, as far as, Wayne does a great job in breaking down classifications of drones for size, payload, different sensors that are on the drones, the different ranges that the different drones have, and it really breaks down the capabilities that we have, which is pretty amazing. And we'll get kind of into that. But I thought I picked the book up just because of how well I read all of Grossman's stuff on the Marine Corps reading list, and picked the book up. I'm like, on killing remotely. Let's see what this is about, and just really thought that for the time that we're in right now, it's a necessary conversation. So we'll get past that. So your first unit, you're out on the Mew. You ended up doing the amphibious landing to a landlocked country. And so coming out of that, you're coming back. Are you switching out units, or are you staying in that unit still?
No, I actually stayed with that unit. I stayed there for 5 years.
Okay.
And I did 3 deployments with that unit. So I came back, picked up captain. I picked up battery command as well. So
Okay.
I became a battery commander. And then we got word that we were on the force list to go to Kuwait and wait for the invasion into Iraq. So I was a battery commander during the initial invasion. So that was 2003. Came back from that deployment, and then had about a year before we went back to the next deployment, where we were at Al Assad.
Okay.
And because there was no air threat during that time, the LAD battalions found themselves doing provisional infantry missions. There wasn't enough boots on the ground to do everything, right? And, we didn't want to take infantry battalions and have them guarding, bases and stuff. It just wasn't a good use of manpower. You guys should be out there closing with and destroying the enemy, but if you're stuck guarding a base, you get a little disgruntled. So they were taking LAD battalions, and we were augmented with all kinds of cooks and candlestick makers, and the Marine Corps band, and the wing band, and all these folks, and we'd run them through training, and then they would do some of the tasks, and we would use the LAD guys for things like patrolling and stuff like that. So that's what I did in 2004. That was my 3rd deployment, and then I did 2 more deployments after that in my career. The 4th one was during the surge in Afghanistan. at Camp Leatherneck. We
Mm-hmm.
kind of owned the battle space around Leatherneck, and doing the same thing. I think it was about 900 square miles of battle space. We had a patrol base, and doing patrols and stuff like that.
Sure.
That was real interesting because I was a battalion XO at the time, and we had a coalition of like 5 different nations that all reported to my CO uh, in the same battle space, and only a few of them worked for him. The rest were like the Afghan National Army. There was it was the Danes were advisors to the ANA, and then we had Bahrainis,
Yep.
and then and we had Brits attached to us as well. So
Yep.
it was really, really cool to sync all those efforts across 5 different nations in one battle space. It was a really rewarding deployment. And it's probably the most kinetic deployment I had with out of all my deployments. Even the invasion of Iraq wasn't as exciting for me as it was in 2010. So
yeah, I think 10 was a whole. I mean, yeah, definitely. That's the most wild fight I've ever been in, and like across all spectrums, from the weapons that were used to like the enemies that we hit. I mean, I never thought I'd fight machine gun bunkers. Fought them. It was a weird time. Something to be said about the coalition forces. It's amazing how many moving pieces were in that campaign, and next to no fratricide. It's amazing to me, like the capability we have as whoever's at the top, whether it's our people or other people, we have an ability to communicate and then work out these schemes of war where we completely deconflict with the people around us. Our geometries of fire are great. And like, it wasn't always like that, hasn't always been like that. But I guess, after 20 years of practicing war, we got pretty good at it. But it's just pretty amazing to me. We had the Brits in Mashtarak just to the north of us, and if we needed help, we could call them up. If they needed help, they could call us up. We didn't really bump into each other too bad. Our air was always deconflicted, so it's like those things are, I think, what a lot of people in militaries would take for granted. You just think those things happen, and those things don't just happen.
Yeah,
And, I think
a lot of coordination.
We're seeing that like on the daily news kind of play out, where you have the revered Red Army come in and their communication and their resourcing and their tactics just don't look. And you look like as somebody that's been at war for the last how many 15 years, since I was a kid until now, it's like I thought they were better than that, and then you see it and it's like, well, they haven't been fighting for 20 years. So they're going to run into these. They're going to hit the growing pains that maybe we were experiencing in 2001, 2, 3, that just weren't widely publicized because,
Yeah, there's some great points there, Ryan. The things that really make professional militaries, or logistics is one of them, right? And we saw the abysmal failures of the Russian logistics in Ukraine, and then combined arms, right? I mean, where's their combined arms?
They don't have
this
them.
conflict. Yeah, and we practiced a lot on the large scale exercises of integrating different weapon systems to get that horns of a dilemma for the enemy, with combined arms, and especially in the Marine Corps, because it's all organic to the Marine Corps, which I think is a lot of the consternation behind Force Design 2030 as well. When people say, hey, we've got a great system here with this MAGTAF that works, and it works for a reason, because you have all of these combat elements that are supporting each other and providing these these capabilities that are all integrated.
What do you
sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off. I want you to breathe more on that as far as Force Design 2030 is concerned. Do you think the old generals have it wrong? Do you think they're just being short-sighted as far as what the technology is providing? Or, I interviewed Lieutenant Colonel Resign Scheller not long ago, and we talked about the same thing, and it's like he thinks they're focused on the wrong thing, but he said until drones, we figure out how to just drop drones out of the sky, this is going to kind of be the way. And that's kind of the opinion that I have. Like, either get on board or you're going to get left behind. And we can debate that, the platforms that were, are going to be removed or already have been removed versus not. But like, what say you to that? What's your thoughts on it?
Well, I would say let's look at the Marine Corps' history. We've always been a service that is paranoid about our existence, for one, right? Because we don't do anything that doesn't exist in the other services, right? We're not an Air Force, we're not a land army. We're soldiers that come from the sea, right? And the Army can do that just as well as we can, and they've proven that time and again between World War II and Korea. But what we've always been good at is anticipating where the next fight is going to be, and what we need to do in order to be successful. You take a look at amphibious assaults, amphibious landings. We were looking at those in the 20s and 30s, and shaping the force to be prepared for a fight coming in the Pacific. And then you get into things like the Korean War and doing vertical envelopment with helicopters, right? So all of these things that were unheard of at the time in the Marine Corps, and close air support. We basically developed and perfected close air support, which is done by all the services now. So I would say this is another one of those pivotal moments where the only thing that will tell if we got it right is the next conflict, when the force is changed, and we'll see if we're prepared for it or not. But I would say we've got a pretty good track record of pivoting the force pretty quickly to be ready for that next conflict. And I think that the force as it sits in 2020 or 2015 was just not. It's just not a raid to fight a near peer in the anti-access aerial denial kind of environment in the Pacific, where you've got to shoot, move, and communicate quickly. Signatures management becomes a thing. We've got pretty spoiled over the last couple of decades of being able to go back to a fob and rest and refit and and head out from there. But fobs are just big targets, right? And so we've got to pivot again, and we've got to be hard targets. We've got to be mobile. We've got to have capabilities that can reach out, touch the enemy, and somebody has to be that stand-in force, like the commandant talks about, right? Somebody's got to kick down the door and fight inside the house, where to create those gaps so the rest of the forces can come in. And I think the Marine Corps has always been pretty good at doing that. So I don't know if the League of Generals that have come out against the commandant's plan, I'm sure they have great reasons. But I know, I've been out of the Marine Corps for 4 years, and I know that things change rapidly these days. And, I'm probably out of touch with what's happening because I'm not there on a daily basis. So it's easy for me to say, this position in the comfort of my own home, that, it's all messed up. And, but if you look at the way conflict is going, taking Ukraine as an example, look at all the kinds of emerging technologies that are happening there that are changing the course of the conflict, right? You've got kamikaze drones, the switchblades. You've got artificial intelligence. You've got commercial space assets that are providing, intelligence and basically a steady stream command and control for the Ukrainians. You've got volunteer forces. Autonomous systems. It's not going to be long until we have a ton of autonomous systems, in all domains. So,
and I seen, we talk about it a little bit when we get into the book here, autonomous systems. I don't know if that's something that we should. That scares. it's scary to even say that to me. It reminds me of the the movie Stealth, or if you wanted to take it all the way back to like Skynet and Terminator. Like, we better write those codes correctly, and there better be some regulation as far as artificial intelligence is concerned, even amongst the military members. And I think, you talk about what is this, the Starlink satellite communications going up with Elon Musk, and there's a couple of different things I'd like to talk about there. What would we do if we were in conflict with China and a Chinese citizen stood up a network of communications that we could no longer hack, that the Chinese used to exploit us in the war? Would we do something to that person? Would we consider them a affront to the fighters that we're going at war with? It's very interesting, and it's unprecedented because nobody's ever even been able to do it. But when somebody says, hey, I need help fighting this war, and then a different person, a non-state actor, has the ability to raise that, like, what's that mean? And what are the implications of that in the future?
Yeah. So you're saying would that under the law of armed conflict, would that make that person a participant in conflict? Yeah. And would that would they therefore be able to be targeted, wherever they are? I wouldn't say that that's direct participation in conflict. But I think that the law of armed conflict would still make a distinction between somebody that's providing a capability that's being used. Mm-hmm. Because you could even argue that anybody in the military defense, industry that's providing capability could be complicit in that. If you take that line of thought to its logical conclusion, I don't think that's the case. I think direct participation in conflict is, it's somebody on the battlefield that is actively seeking out the enemy and trying to engage them somehow. But I think providing a commercial satellite network that allows people to talk, I don't think that's the case. So
I just wonder where it goes, and then where would the lines be drawn? Because, like, if it was somebody, a non-state actor, that was doing something that enhanced, let's say, China's command and control node over us, and it's something we couldn't do, could they get off on, well, we're just providing the commercial guys to the Chinese? I don't think America would buy that if it was us suffering, is what I'm saying. And hopefully we would all just follow the rules as they're written, but I don't know if that would happen. So, and then if the laws of armed conflict don't implicate him as a combatant for doing that, well, then there's no, that's just kind of like, I guess what I'm saying is, like, we might think that, but if Russia doesn't feel that way, and if Russia feels like he's complicit, then, they can do whatever they want, I suppose, and then that, their retaliation will come if there has to be retaliation. But I just think it puts it in a weird spot where a private citizen, a non-state actor, can have that much, whatever you would say, influence over a war zone.
Yeah, I would agree with you. It's interesting to see it play out. You talked about the Chinese. There was just recently I think it was yesterday, it came out report about TikTok, right? TikTok's basically an intelligence gathering platform, right? Everyone's uploading all of their personal details and information, and on the end user over there in China, they're probably, collecting profiles and dossiers on all these folks that are just willfully giving up things that we used to cover under OPSEC, right? So
it's interesting because a lot of people's passwords now are facial recognition, and when you do TikTok and filters, all you're giving them is every single piece of facial recognition that they need. So, that's interesting.
Yeah, or you think of it this way: if everybody in the military uploaded their facial features to a video, and your enemy decided to build an autonomous system that used autonomous target recognition based off of facial recognition AI software, you'd already have a database of all the people you needed to hunt down and kill, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yep. Yeah, and their common patterns and usages and interests and hobbies and
Yeah. Yeah.
connections.
You're basically just giving away pattern of life information. So
Yeah.
scary.
Yeah, it is scary. It's interesting to say the least. It's a lot of things that changed in the last, 20 years. That um, I guess in the book you kind of talk about, does it revolutionize war? Does it change the means from the end? And like I think I'm on the same boat that says the drones didn't really change it. They become a tool in it. The means is still going to be the means, and the end's going to be the end. But it's definitely revolutionized like how we fight, I think. And like to get back to force design, just a little bit for a minute. Gunnar LaRose put an article out. I don't know if it was, I can't remember if it was the Marine Times or the Gazette, but he followed out one of the line companies kind of through their range 400 and 410 Alpha. And like they used something like the Switchblade, kamikaze drones. Mm-hmm. And it went really well. Like from reading the article, by the time that the Marines were actually crossing the LOD, everything was smoldering already from drones. And as they're on the move, they're unmasking technical vehicles, targets that were technical vehicles. And as they're coming in, the Marines never had to slow down once they crossed the LOD until they got to the objective, is what it seemed like. Because as these technical vehicles would displace, these kamikazes are coming straight down and neutralizing them. Boom, boom, boom. And it's like, if that is the future, and that is really the capability that we have, is we have these Switchblade kamikaze style drones supported by remote piloted aircraft above, and some of those hero drones, some of the bigger armed Predator drones, and we have those above. Do we need to have tanks out there? And if you do have tanks, let's assume that everybody has the same technology that we have. It's kind of pointless. If you don't have something protecting the airspace from drones coming in and hitting your tanks, why would you even have them anymore? And I mean, I think that that's kind of like one of the biggest takeaways from watching some of the live stuff coming from Ukraine and Russia is like they're taking drones that are these commercially sold drones and outfitting them with dumb bombs and mortars and just dropping the enemy's armor. I mean, like, and not risking a life for it. So on that side of the force design, when you take away the tanks and maybe some of the long cannons I disagree with a little bit, maybe not, depending on the ones you take away, but you take tanks and some of that stuff away, I kind of feel like putting it on the battlefield with the technology and drones now is kind of stupid. So I agree with that side of it. What's your feelings on that?
We've only had like 2 tank battalions in the Marine Corps, during my entire time, in the service. And, the times that I saw tanks at exercises and integrated with them and saw them, integrated into the scheme of maneuver, I thought they were a fantastic asset to have, right? There's nothing like that shock factor of a tank rolling through your city. Mm-hmm. But they have to be protected. They've got to be protected from with infantry. They've got to be protected from the air threat. So really, I think what we're adjusting to is the fact that we now face an air threat, and the air threat could come from anywhere at any time. And we haven't really had to face this significantly for decades. So the counter to that has been really slow. It's slow to evolve. And I told you I was an air defense guy. One of the things I was studying for the majority of my career was the UAS threat or the drone threat, right? Even as far back as 2005, I used to teach a class on the drone threat to the MAGTF, and I would talk about how it was the fastest growing field of aviation across the globe, and it's one of the fastest growing threats to the MAGTF. And we value what we put our money towards in the budget, and we just kept cutting air defense units. And it was probably the wake up call is probably around 2014 when ISIS started dropping mortars from drones
Yep.
on our troops in Iraq. And we're like, hey, we have no effective counter to this. We couldn't really target it with a Stinger missile. It doesn't put off enough heat signature. It's too small. It's not a good weapon to target match. You're not going to fire $100,000 missile against a $1,000 drone. So, so I think we're adjusting to that. But tanks, in my opinion, I think for the Marine Corps, they serve a purpose at times. But I don't see us, suffering significantly by trading that in for some more precise anti-ship cruise missile units or some drone units that can reach out and fire some Hellfires or some drop some GBUs. I don't see that, but
I agree.
I think if you look at a couple of conflicts, like we talked about earlier, Azerbaijan and Armenia, and how effective the Bayraktar TB2s from Turkey were in that conflict, of just completely turning the tide of the conflict. And then, how effective drones have been in Ukraine. We've got to adjust. And we can't buy these exquisite. We are buying exquisite platforms. We're buying MQ9s for the MAGTF, but the sweet spot for us is probably something that can be employed at the squad level, the company level, that doesn't require a lot of training. There's a lot of autonomy built into it, and you can mass and swarm and overwhelm a target. Kind of like what you're talking about on range 410 there, right? Just you got all these precise fires at that level, and it becomes a game changer, right?
Yeah. So there's a lot of that in the book. A lot of the personal experiences that you got from interviews with pilots or with operators, sensor operators, and we'll cover a little bit of that. But it's a game changer. It's the reason I wanted to have this conversation, because it's something that has absolutely changed everything about war. And it doesn't have to be these big commercial expensive units that we're getting. These guys are being able to buy these things off commercial sites at low dollar, and then you tie dumb bombs to them, like you say, dropping mortars and things of that nature. And that's something that, well, you said 2014 it became a problem, and I retired that year. I got out that year. So it's like, I didn't ever see it. I never had that threat. I never thought like, oh, I hope that's my drone. I never had to think that. And now everybody has to think that. And so you said the last 6 years that you were operating, ideally or most specifically with the drones and kind of seeing that?
Yeah, it's really the last 4 years of my career. I spent a couple of years in the Pentagon working on programmatics and budgets and stuff for our UAS squadrons and capabilities. And then I got to a point where they were opening up an officer MOS for UAS pilots. And, I was getting kind of long in the tooth in my career. And I remember I asked a colonel, I was like, you think I should throw my name in the hat for this and transition into this? He said, yeah, we need people at all ranks to form out these units. So go ahead. So I put my name in for a transition conversion board, got selected, went through the Air Force's remotely piloted aircraft training pipeline, and went out to the squadron VMU-3 in Hawaii when they moved in 2014. Served as the OPSO, the XO, and then the CO for the last 26 months of my career. So
light needs to be shed on this topic. We're not having a conversation that we need to be having, is my guess. What are those situations that kind of piqued that interest?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things. For 24 of the 26 months I was in command, we were supporting some operations overseas against a violent extremist organization. And I was sending detachments over there every 6 months, and we were basically just hunting. Right, we're out there looking for IR signatures, and when we would find them, we weren't armed, but we would call in locations, and artillery and close air support would be raining down on those targets, and we're pretty successful. We had a kind of a running tally of how many enemy killed in action we felt we were responsible for, and it was over 100 in 2 years. So pretty effective platform. Um, and when I got to the end of my career, I started thinking a little bit more about not necessarily my Marines and how they responded to that work, um, but I went to this transition seminar, and they said, if you could do anything when you retire, what would it be? And I said, well, I want to get paid to write smart ass comments. And they said, well, I don't think anyone's going to pay you for that. So what would you do? And I said, well, I've always wanted to write a book. And they said, well, what would you write about? And I said, well, I'd write about what I know. And, I know drones. I've been a Marine for 2 decades. I think there's some stories I could tell. I just need to find, kind of the topic that needs some research, and needs some light shined on it. So I came up with a title. This is the first thing that I did. Um, I came up with On Killing Remotely, based off of Grossman's On Killing.
Mm-hmm.
And I had an idea. I said, I want to study this community based off of this, the same rubric that Grossman did, where he looks at all kinds of different factors for how the human response to killing and conflict, and why people respond the way they do. Because I think this is such a unique community of people that are doing things differently than we've ever done before. And I just wanted to see, how does it impact them? So I actually wrote to Grossman on LinkedIn, and I said, hey, I've got an idea for a book. I want to write with you, and I never expected to hear back from him. Right. It was one of those things. It was like, oh, it doesn't hurt to ask.
Yep.
And he wrote back about a week later and said, hey, Wayne, this is a really cool idea. Let's do it. And at that point, I was like, oh, well,
now the work
yeah,
starts.
yeah, now I got to do this. He said, yes. So I said, okay, this is awesome. Now what do we do? So he kind of mentored me through this whole process of, first person interviews and, research on everything that's been written on the topic, and conducting surveys, and, and naturally, the more I got into it, the Air Force was doing the predominance of the killing with drones, right? Because they had the ARM platforms. So the more people I talked to were Air Force pilots and sensor operators and intelligence analysts, and the stories that they started telling me that some of them I talk about in the book were just they were overwhelming to me in the beginning. Some of those interviews were like cathartic. I felt like I was more like a psychologist, than I was an author trying to collect some information from folks. And I said, there's a ton of challenges that this community faces, and nobody really advocates for them. Nobody tells their side of the story. You get it's one of the most useful tools we have in our arsenal, but the people that are employing it are referred to as desk jockeys or video game nerds and stuff like that. But the Air Force is just slaying people with these RPAs, and their pilots are just completely marginalized. So I wanted to study that. I wanted to understand how people respond, why they respond the way they do to this work, and then where are the pain points, and what can we change to make the community better? Because this isn't going away, right?
No, it's the future.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
totally agree. Well, let's get into the book a little bit. I have a couple of different pages marked out, some excerpts that, if you don't mind, I'm just going to go ahead and read the excerpt, and then kind of we'll kick the conversation that spawns off of that. All right, going to the book now, and I'm not gonna read the whole book, and I'm only gonna read small snippets. If you guys need to pick this book up and read all this information for yourself. Um, and like I said, conversation will spawn out of it. Chapter 2, An Insatiable Appetite, Rise of the Robots. And the caption above says, before the war, the Predator had skeptics because it did not fit the old ways. Now it was clear that the military does not have enough unmanned vehicles. We're entering an era in which the unmanned vehicle of all kinds will take a greater importance in space, in land, in the air, and at sea. And this chapter kind of sets the construct for how much. Okay, so basically exactly what it said. The appetite from the DoD, it was unquenchable. Let's say the thirst. They wanted more and more and more. Can you talk about how you constructed that chapter and the research that went into that? Because you talk about it being in that chapter, they can't get enough of it. The want and the need for these newer, more advanced systems was more and more. And then you talk about almost the voyeurism of it in that chapter as well a little bit.
Yeah, so having full motion video piped into operations centers, from the company level up to the division and MEF, and even the CENTCOM level, or even higher, going into the Pentagon and things like that. Having live streaming full motion video provided from an asset that's overhead in real time. When people saw that for the first time, they couldn't get enough of it. They said, I want more of this. I need more of this. This gives me situational awareness of what's happening, right? And what commander doesn't want to know, in real time, what his forces or her forces are doing,
100%.
on the battlefield, because they want to be able to influence the outcome, and they feel like they know more by being able to see it.
Yep.
So we rapidly expanded this capability across all the services and across all different platforms, from like the hand launch stuff that you employed, or have seen, all the way up to Predators, Reapers, things like that. There was a period of time where we had two VMUs, the Marine Unmanned Aerial Vehicle Squadrons, in the Marine Corps, and we had two for quite a long time. And at the start of Operation Iraqi Freedom in 2003, and probably until 2008 timeframe, so about a 5-year period, these two units were the most deployed units within the DoD, because they needed to be forward deployed. So they would spend 7 months in Iraq, 5 months back home, doing their rest, respite period, their all that stuff, and then they begin their workup period again. And 5 months later, they're there. So we just ran those units into the dirt. Hardly anybody would stay in the Marine Corps if you knew that was your 5 years, or your 4 years of an enlistment. It was going to be spent doing that, with no end in sight. So we lost a lot of quality talent to that. They added a third VMU squadron. They added the ability to send things in detachments as opposed to the full squadron deploying. But at the same time, combatant commanders throughout the globe saw this capability, and each one of them said, hey, I need my ISR platform. I need specific lines dedicated to me here in PACOM or CENTCOM, or AFRICOM. I mean, you name it. So the appetite for it just kept growing and growing. It got to be so insatiable that we had to hire basically defense contractors to fly these things, and we leased the service. We basically leased camera hours. So that's where you get all these things like Scan Eagles flying around, and then we'd have Marine intelligence folks that would we'd be sitting on the crew and passing that information off. So yeah, so I'd like to say that it's, it has declined as conflict has slowed down in certain areas, but it hasn't.
Yeah.
It's still the same appetite, and none of the COCOMs have said, no, I can do with less ISR.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, so it just keeps growing.
And as a ground guy, I can say when you have ISR above me and you can tell me what door those guys just took those RPG warheads in and exactly what you see on the inside because it doesn't have a roof over the courtyard, and you can, like, when you're giving all that to me through the radio as I'm making my movement to the objective building, yeah, I love that too. There's no doubt about it. But I do find it funny. I was just at a best sniper competition out in Lejeune just like a month and a half ago. And one of the vendors that was there, getting their name out, was the Fire from Enclosure Law platform, the light armor rocket. And they've made them, the signature on them now, they used water and some other engineering to make the signature only a 9mm signature so that the signature drones out in Russia can't ID them firing rockets and put counter battery on them. And then they put... I don't know if these are in action in Ukraine right now or not, but I know he said that they have tested putting dual FFE laws on a quadcopter. And it's like, okay, well, like if you've done that and you lowered the signature and the signature of the quadcopter so small that their radar can't pick it up, well, then, yeah, there's no point in having armor unless you can protect the armor because that's just going to double whammy and it's catastrophic kill and it's over, right? And so I found it funny, though, that we're not actively in the war, per se right now. And they're still at every vendor fair and still on base and still moving them and still talking about what they can do. And they had all kind of robotics there, not just flying ones. They had, other stuff more. Pretty wild. I'm going to go back to the book right here. And you talked about ISIS before, you lacing up dumb bombs. It says in 2016, the Islamic State modified commercial off-the-shelf drones to drop grenades and mortars on troops, equipment, and buildings in Iraq and Syria. Subsequently, the Islamic State claimed to be the first terrorist group to successfully weaponize small drones and kill with it. In Ukraine, crowdfunding for the civilian populace aided in the development of small commercial drones to support the Ukrainian army's fight against the Russian-backed separatists. The upsurge of cheap commercial off-the-shelf drones meant that anyone could field an air force on a modern battlefield, and that kind of goes back to speak a little bit about what we were saying before. Now you kind of have to worry about it no matter what theater you go into.
Yeah, it's in that volunteer crowdsourcing thing you're talking about in Ukraine that's in full swing right now.
Yep.
In fact, I'm connected with a group of people that are actively seeking, donations for funds that they use to get drones in the hands of, people fighting over there in Ukraine.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a wild situation. I don't know necessarily as far as that one goes. I don't know where to fall out on it. I don't know. I'm talking about one of the most corrupt countries as far as things that we know with Ukraine, and I know they got some new leadership. What Zelensky was able to do as far as be the person that he needed to be for his people and to rally the world, not just his own country, but the world, is amazing. It's just a side of unbelievable, honestly.
Well, I think leaders rise to the occasion. And Zelensky has proven that he's a leader, and he's probably always been a leader. He just, he faced his country's darkest hour, and he had the opportunity, if you remember in the beginning of the conflict, where we said, hey, we can evacuate you to safety. And he's like, I don't need to leave. I need support.
I don't need a ride. I need bombs and jets.
That's right. Yeah, it's my country.
It's interesting. I don't know how it's going to play out. I do know that it's interesting. It's so weird to feel like we're talking. I have these conversations with everybody, and every time it feels so weird. It's just like you have Russia. They want what they want. They don't really care what we think about that. They're going to continue to not care what we think about that. No matter how many off-ramps the DOD and Homeland Security and all these other people try to push into Russia. How about this off ramp? How about this off ramp? Like, when you think about it, this guy is an extreme KGB spy. He didn't want the fall to ever happen, and then once it happened, then you look at what NATO's done, and like, kind of just working right around him, going past every red line for the last 30 years that he said that he was going to have. And so it's just weird. It's weird to see what will happen for it. I think that if you are Vladimir Putin and you say, okay, I'll take the L and I'll return home, I think you lose power anyway. I don't think your people let you stay in very long. And if you don't take the L and you press this out and you sacrifice 20 or 30,000 of your sons of Russia, I don't think you keep power that way very long either. And so it's like, what is he to do? It's weird. I studied Vladimir Putin in school when I was getting my Homeland Security degree, and I wrote about him, looked him up, looked at all the things that he's done, and he doesn't care what our rules are. And he hasn't cared what our rules were for a long time. So it makes it a contentious situation to which clearly none of our analysts had guessed right on what the prediction was, what he was going to do. And so that makes it all the more concerning for me, is to say, well, you got it wrong all the way up until now, and now I'm supposed to trust that you got it right and you know what to do from here. But hopefully we got people thinking stuff up. So I'll get back to the book. Just a little bit ways past that, you talk about Marine Special Operations Command. And out of necessity, MARSOC built a family of small UASs and filled the void internally to operate in every environment. Part of that small UAS family was a system that systems included what was called Lethal Miniature Aerial Munitions, LMAMS, LMAMS. LMAMS, with the most prevalent one named the Switchblade from the manufacturer. AeroVironment.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah.
And that's the one that's kind of in Ukraine right now, right? That you were talking about.
Yeah. MARSOC is. They've been using that for a decade, probably. Maybe longer. But they've been using it, and they started off in Afghanistan with it, and they had the ability to cue that onto a target from another small drone, and they're they, out of necessity, as I said in there, they figured out how to do it because they didn't get the Predator or Reaper support that they were looking for, so they built their own organic support. And they've been way out in front of everybody for a long period of time. They were kind of leading the effort within SOCOM on these small and miniature UAS. It's been really exciting to see.
And so how's that work? You said so there's a unmanned drone up that is locking the target for the switch. How's it work?
Well, one was finding the target and then cueing the operator of the Switchblade, providing coordinates and stuff like that. So don't want to get into too much of the details of how it works.
It tells them, it relays like a roundabout where to go, and then they're able to launch that munitions into that.
Yeah, basically a spotter and a shooter, right?
Yeah, that's wild. MARSOC's success employed in the Switchblades paved the way for the use and proliferation of small lethal UASs within regular military, particularly Army and Marine Corps. And yeah, I just want to talk on that. That's revolutionized it. I had a guy on, John Wayne Williams, gunnery sergeant type, and he was one of the guys that went into Syria and crossed the Flot over there and did some fighting, and they used him a lot. He was with some other guys, some ODA guys that were up there at the time, and they had a pretty good budget, I think, and a pretty good stockpile, and they were able to go over there and do some real damage with some of that stuff. And that would have been around 14 to 16 in that area. And so pretty wild there. I'm gonna flip forward right here. We talked about it a little bit before, talking about the drone seeming voyeuristic almost because of the amount of watch hours. And you mentioned leasing that out. I want to talk about that a little bit more too. But in here you say, you're giving an excerpt from, I think it was Captain Wood, described in vivid detail how he experienced the humanity of the targets he struck. He said, "You were getting a really intimate look into a person's life because the cameras are so good. We watched a guy place an IED for 30 minutes and then go home and have a fight with his wife as he constructed more IEDs in the backyard. It was a very humanizing experience. It's incredibly voyeuristic." And that's quoting one of the guys that she interviewed there. I think that as I read the book, I felt like I understood a little bit more where the struggles, I guess you would say, as somebody at least that's watching the camera, whether you're an operator of sensors or a pilot. When I go over, there's that anger, and you talked about this a little bit in the book. I have the anger, I have the fight or flight because I'm right here and the danger is right in my face, and then you have the mechanics of your brain and how it works of filing things distorted so that you don't put them all together, kind of protecting you. And without that fight or flight mode being turned on initially, and you're in the simulator 7,000 miles away, but as Grossman talks about, the further removed you are from the actual combat, I think that's a lot because of the visuality of it too, and the smells and the sounds. But now you're watching it in 4K, so it doesn't matter that you're on the other side of the world. You're living it right here in high definition, and you're going to see all of that. And I think that's a lot where, like, we don't do that. If we go do a battle damage assessment, especially there in the last couple, especially in Marja, I mean, you go to do a battle damage assessment, a lot of times you were lucky if they didn't already have them wheeled away with the wheelbarrows and wash the blood off the sand just to mess with your mind or, you know, out of ritual. But these guys are not only taking action, but then they're going to hover over it and watch it for the next, you know, sometimes guys talked about, some of you guys in here, half a day, 6-7 hours later, and they're watching, you know, family members come clean up the remains of what their munitions did, and that will absolutely do it. There's no doubt in my mind.
Yeah. So one of the things that you mentioned, you know, Grossman talked about was really the resistance to killing as a function of your physical distance from the enemy. Right. He said the further removed you are from that physically, the less resistance you have to killing. And he takes it all the way up to what he referred to as, I believe he called it the sexual range, almost, where you're eye to eye and you can stab somebody, right? And then he takes it all the way out to, you know, long range artillery and bombers and stuff like that. And I thought that was really interesting. But what I wanted to understand was where does a large armed drone fit in there, because you're physically you're at the extreme long distance, right? So your physical range is almost irrelevant because you're completely out of harm's way.
Mm-hmm.
But your distance, your cognitive distance to the fight, based off of everything that you're observing in high definition for long periods of time, your cognitive distance becomes extremely close.
Yeah.
And I think there's definitely something there to, you know, typically we didn't disassociate cognitive and physical distance, right? In the past, like your cognitive distance is the same as your physical distance.
Right.
You know, you can only see so far, and beyond your line of sight, you're just employing weapons beyond that.
Mm-hmm.
But in this case, it's just this strange situation where you're cognitively you're watching a person for a very long period of time, and you're seeing the humanity of that individual.
Mm-hmm.
You're seeing things that you recognize, you know, as a typical dude would do, right? Taking their kids to school, or kicking the ball around in the backyard, or fighting with their wife. And then sometimes you see them do some, you know, nefarious shit, and you know, and that's the reason you're watching them in the first place, because you're looking for that opportunity to, you know, to strike that target. So it's the dehumanizing becomes a lot easier the further you are physically removed. But in this case, I think the physical distance is irrelevant. It's the cognitive distance to the target that makes you understand the humanity of the target, makes it harder to dehumanize them in order to kill them.
Sure.
So,
and that's going to be compounded the longer that you're on a specific target,
yeah.
is what I would imagine. And you talked a little bit about that. Some of the guys in there that would follow targets for long extended periods of time, and then almost feel like they were robbed of their reward because one of the different shifts would end up getting the kill before they came back on duty. Almost like it was something was taken from them. And I can kind of relate to that a little bit, like on the ground, if you have a big mission or big op coming up, especially if you had, skin in the game, as far as, maybe this mission was built around you losing somebody, and you had some unfinished business, whatever the case. And then if you're pulled off of that and then it goes up and the plan goes smooth and everything gets taken down, I would say that you would feel robbed about that in the same sort of way.
Yeah, it's a strange sense of loss that you feel ownership or the right to kill a person from time and effort invested.
Yeah.
I find that fascinating.
It's fascinating.
One thing I wanted, we haven't really talked about this, but I do mention it in the book, is that I just want to say that this isn't a suffering competition, right? So people like to say, well, you're not in harm's way. There's no way that these drone crews could be suffering. You're not risking your life. What are you complaining about? And I just want to say I'm not comparing apples to apples here, right? I'm not saying drone crews suffer and therefore that takes away from
Sure.
the people that are forward deployed, right? I'm not trying to make that argument at all. I think they just suffer a little differently in their own way.
Sure. And no, I feel like I picked that up from you throughout reading the book. I didn't feel like you were trying to diminish or degrade or take away from anybody on the ground, but more trying to show light that, hey, even though they're not on the ground, we have an issue here, and there may be certain things that we can do to make it better, but ultimately killing somebody in high definition, your cognitive distance to it is a lot of times closer than it was to me. Our average tick in Marja ranged from, before it got green in the summertime, 350 meters, might be a close engagement. And 3 or 4 power RCO, it's a little closer, but it's not in high definition on a screen looking at you. You're not able to zoom in on him while he's taking a piss. Some of our snipers maybe deal with a little bit of that and can deal with, get that. But my cognitive distance is my physical distance. And most of the time, if I'm doing my job right, I got you pushed from 350 to 700.
Yeah.
If I'm not doing my job right and I get ambushed, then my cognitive distance is going to be a whole lot different. But the other thing I would say is I'm not hanging out and picking this guy up. I'm putting him down, making sure I know that he's down. I'm reporting it, and then I'm maneuvering on whatever's left or getting back to wherever I came from. And I think that cognitively speaking and what they visually are going through and taking into their brain is can be much more than guys on the ground. Everybody thinks that just because you're forward deployed and you're on the ground, you're in all this kinetic fighting. That's just not true. Most of our life is spent hydrating, pissing, being bored, jerking off, and then hitting like a repeat button. Like that is what you do over there, sprinkled with little dashes of high kinetics. Every once in a blue moon or once in a career, you'll have a Fallujah 2 or an Operation Mosh to Rock 2010 or a Sengen, and those are those dashes. And it's just those small number, a couple hundred people that go through that real on-the-ground, face-to-face suffering. It's not thousands and thousands of people, where here you're talking about they can't get enough drones, and then they're making MOSs for drone pilots, and it seems like what you said, I don't think it's going anywhere. I think it's going to continue to grow. So to not look at it and say, hey, all of you people that want to do the computer nerd thing, that's fine. You can have all your fraternal little nicknames and stuff, but these people are doing numbers, and you're not doing numbers. And they're really killing human beings, and you're not doing any of that. So you just need to pipe down. You don't have any idea what you're talking about. It seems funny to me that would even be going on, but I come from where you come from, and we're pretty much hard on our own people too. Like we would probably
I mean, the worst offenders are the people that wear the same cloth as you, right? They're
100%.
It's because everybody's positioning to be the alpha. So
that's right. Yeah. But I will say this: I've had Predator support. I've had Hellfire support from UAS in Marja. And I have a slew of buddies who couldn't say enough good things about some of the newer stuff that has come along since then. Page
Well,
4.
on that same topic, I think there's a part in the book where I think the title was called "More Kills Than Scarface."
Yeah.
Yeah. So my sister squadron on the flight line when I was a CO was their name was Scarface. It was one of the HMLAs. So Cobras and Hueys, and those guys they're the meat eaters of the rotary wing world, right? They're the attack helicopters.
Yep.
And we'd go to meetings, and I'd be with their CO and other COs and our group commander who was also a Cobra pilot, and they would be talking about what they've been up to, and I'd be like, yeah, just want to remind everyone that we have more kills than Scarface this month, and it would just piss them off, right? They're like, no, you're a little drone. Go back to your video game nerd, And it's more kills than Scarface, Yeah. So it was a lot of fun to do that kind of stuff.
It is funny, and just to I want to kind of put a point on this, the risk that we forego by using unmanned aerial systems. When I was in Marja, I want to say it was it was late June or early July. We had skids in support of a squad that was in a tick, and regardless of what happened or what mistakes may have been made or not made, the pilot made a decision to come in low to fire some guns and some rockets, and came to a hover, and that pilot was shot down right in the belly with an RPG, and both those captains died. And that's horrible. If that was a UAS, nobody dies. We lose, a couple $1,000 piece of equipment, maybe some ammunition if it doesn't simp debt, but nobody's dead. And that's the finer point that comes, that we can get that exact same aerial support now without risking human life, an American life. And that's the beauty in it if we can maintain it.
Yeah, that was Sugar Bear and Weasel. I knew both those guys.
Okay.
In fact, my battalion was we were the MEF's QRF for the MEF's entire battle space, and we were spinning up to go in and pull them out of there. So, yeah.
Rough time, rough situation, and then the guys on the ground, not saying nothing bad against them. I'm not saying anybody, like I said, I don't know the full story, but I know that it touched everybody, and then consequently, all of Marja wanted to come unglued because of the motivation of shooting down a bird. So they all come out of the woodwork. But the rest of Sugar Bear and Weasel's fellas, they let it rain for the next 3 months until we left. Anything that came in, the whole tree line went away. They definitely weren't playing around after that. So yeah, that's something else. It's something else, and that's just the point I want to make on it. Is once we have this technology to send those skids out there with a pair of captains, risking it all, doesn't make sense. If we needed to, if they figure out a way to knock the drones out of the sky and all of them start falling, we need to resort back to that. Then cool. But if we can send a piece of equipment up there, whether it's autonomous, and like we talked about that before, or not. It's better than sacrificing somebody's life. So,
yeah, I think there's always going to be a role for boots on the ground.
That'll never go away.
No, I hope not. I
should never go away.
These over the horizon, fights that we think we can win. I think there's no substitute for physical presence, of being there, of living in and amongst the people and understanding their culture, and feeling the same environment and pains that they're feeling. I think is that's what we do, right? And drones are just an aid to make us do that better. I don't think we should get to the point where we've got autonomous armies and we just send in the drones and that's it. So that's my personal opinion on it. But
no, I agree completely. No, I wanted to highlight another part from the book here. You're talking to Marine Staff Sergeant Christopher Herr, and it says he flew Group 3s for 13 years, RQ-7 Shadows in Afghanistan, RQ-2 Pioneers in Iraq before that. Staff Sergeant Herr recounted several instances of flying in 2010 in Afghanistan when he was deployed for the Marine Unmanned Aerial Vehicle Squadron 3, VMU-3, and participated in Operation Mashtarak, the Battle of the town of Marja, the last stronghold of the Taliban within Helmand Province. For 2 weeks prior to coalition forces seizing the city, Herr and his fellow Marines flew shadows over the city day and night, low altitude, and the RPA engines made a very distinctive loud noise similar to a lawnmower that could be easily be heard on the ground below. However, the Marines used the shadows noise to their advantage as a psychological weapon to disrupt the enemy's sleep and desensitize them to the sound of RPAs that would later be used for target identification. Once the battle commenced during one flight, Herr identified a man on his camera splashing water around some holes in the exterior wall surrounding a house. What appeared to be an innocent act, Herr rightfully interpreted as an enemy fighter preparing a fighting position, attempting to reduce the amount of dust, the signature that would appear when he fired his rifle at U.S. troops through a murder hole, a small hole in the wall used to shoot out at the enemy to conceal their position. I thought that was interesting that you put that in there because that's something that we dealt with a lot in Marja, and obviously that's what he was talking about was Operation Mashtarak in Marja, and they would have the interconnected cities, interconnected compounds where you might be able to move from this compound through 35 other compounds and get out the other side without ever exposing yourself to the greater outside world. And then on top of that, they're prepping murder holes with water so that you can't see the dust fly up. They were very they're not stupid. You know, a lot of people want to say that they're stupid. They're not stupid people, and they're very accustomed to fighting wars. Their villages are built for it. So
yeah, they're warriors.
I mean, from the beginning.
Yeah.
I'm going to move now to another portion of the book. It's a little further along, and it talks about fairness in war. I know that you probably know where I'm talking about. Just bear with me while I pull it up real quick. The element of surprise, the enemy never sees it coming, is the kind of the caption here, and we'll skip down a little bit back to the book. Throughout the history of warfare, humans have worked every advantage possible, manipulating both the means and the environment to prevent a fair fight, making it more difficult to square up against your enemy and kill them face to face. You could argue that killing an enemy without your presence even being known has always been the ultimate goal of warfare, especially if you can get it done in a manner that prevents the attacker from being at any risk in the situation. This is the nature of killing with the RPA, and at the moment of truth, it may be easier to kill one's enemy. And on killing, the aggressive predisposition of a killer was discussed, and how much easier it was to kill than kill when their presence remained undetected. That's the part that I pulled out. I guess we kind of went over it a little bit more, a little bit earlier already in the free dialogue there, but it goes on to talk about whether that's fair or not, and people like proponents against the UAS and our remote piloted aircraft RPA community. It's like, what do you mean it's not? Like, that's the whole point of it. The whole point of it is to make it as unfair as possible so that I can bend him to my will.
Yeah.
And unfair is a good thing for that.
Yeah. We don't want to fight fair fights, right? We want to have an overmatch that is so overwhelming that we always win.
Right. Yeah. Amazing. And so when you say the proponents that go against, or the anti-UAS crowd, who is that? Have you dealt with these people? Have you met some of these people or talked to any of them?
Yeah, I mean,
is it like activist groups or?
Yeah, I mean, there's people that write about it. There's people that don't think that we should. Most of it's aligned with some sort of political agenda, right? Mm-hmm. And it really depends on who's in office, and they'll say, President Obama is using drones to kill more people than we've ever killed before, and is this right? And are we just causing more civilian casualties, and is this is this harmful to the American way of fighting because we're not risking anything, and and then you get other people that talk about the amount of civilian casualties that have occurred in places like Pakistan, and how the entire FATA area, that federally administrated tribal area within Pakistan, felt like they were constantly under surveillance, and they could have been struck from the air at any time, and it was really stressful for them, and things like that. So usually the people that talk about drones in a negative way have some sort of agenda, um, that they're, whether it's against the war or against a political leader or something like that. They're trying to make a case for why employing drones is bad. And I try to make the case that it's we don't employ them by themselves. Hardly ever do we do that, right? They're integrated into some sort of other system where you have additional assets, people on the ground, or other aviation assets, or things like that. So it's not like we think we're going to win a fight by just sending drones. But there are people that think that drone crews are just cold-blooded killers that are just killing with no remorse, and it's I don't understand where they come up with these ideas. We've been fighting using systems and weapons that can be employed well beyond visual line of sight for quite a long time. But they specifically want to focus on drones. It's become a political issue probably the last few presidents, and anytime there's a drone strike that's controversial, you hear about it. It makes the news. So
I think most notably was Hamid Karzai, right? The drone strike as a response to the explosion at the gate, and then that turns out that it was a bunch of women and kids. And that to me, I guess that's a good segue in to bring up, like, with the amount of technology that's there and the amount of 4K zoom and eyes that we have, it is very strange to me that we would have hit a vehicle full of women and kids. I'm not asking you to comment on that, but when I read your book, it seemed like there's so many SOPs and protocols that come through for when we're going to hit a target through one of these platforms. It seemed like there's a lot of, like, obviously there's a chain of command. You got your sensor operators, you got your pilot, you got your people that are releasing, and then you got command authority that's releasing all that. And it just seems really strange when you have that kind of capability and that kind of eyes that you would hit a vehicle with a bunch of women and kids. And maybe that's why it becomes political. And like you said, like, I don't know which president out of the last several has the most, but I know that under Obama it grew significantly, and a lot of strikes were done under Obama. And not that I care if there were strikes that were bettering the American resolve and political end state, then okay, that is what it is. And if it's drones that are being sacrificed and hours that are being sacrificed versus people like me that are going to go out there and be mangled when they step on a bomb that they didn't see, then I'm all about it. But
I would say this, Ryan, the fact that we still make mistakes, even with all of that intelligence and full motion video and things like that, is because it's a human endeavor. It's still humans that are making decisions. It's humans that are analyzing the situation, humans that are, taking in all of that intelligence and fusing it all together. And nothing is entirely certain. We, as much as we want to eliminate the fog of war, there's still going to be friction. There's still going to be fog, and we're still going to make mistakes. I've never said that drones are going to be a clean way of fighting. I think that they offer some advantages and some additional capabilities like persistence and what I like to refer to as tactical patience. Um, there shouldn't be a rush to strike. Um, that situation was obviously because of the context of what happened, like the car bomb. They tied some signals intelligence to the wrong person. They followed this person. The pattern of life basically became a signature strike based off of pattern of life information. And they tied it all together and said, we think that this is going to be, another car bomb, and they got it wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, and I'm not, it's not a way to say I criticize it. It's just, if the question comes up, I wonder how this would be political. That's the first thing that would come to mind. With all this technology and all this capability and all this video, you still are messing it up. And I understand fog of war, and I get it. I wish we didn't kill innocent people.
Yeah.
There's enough people dying already to kill innocent ones sucks, but in war, there will always be collateral damage, and I don't care if that's with drones and fully autonomous vehicles or boots on the deck coming to your door. There will always be accidents, and there will always be collateral damage. And so I was talking to like an old lieutenant of mine, one of my mentors, and it's like you got to, at some point, you got to draw the line and say, at what point is it worth going to war right now? And if the answer is you are not willing to kill unarmed civilians, then you shouldn't go to war as a country right then. Because when you go to war, you are going to kill unarmed civilians. It's going to happen. And I don't mean you're going to murder them. I mean accidentally through wrong signals, intelligence, and patterns of life, these things are going to happen. So if you are not ready, if the act was not so egregious that you're ready to do that, then you shouldn't even be there. Because that is how fundamental casualties of war is going to be on a civilian population.
Well, I mean, it was like huge international news, right? That strike, and what a lot of folks really wanted was accountability. Like, oh, you killed innocent civilians. I want accountability. I was interviewed on NPR for this, and I was talking with uh, a person who was obviously demanding accountability, and she said, "Do you think someone will be held accountable for it?" And I said, "No, it's not a war crime. It's a mistake." We didn't deliberately violate, the rules of engagement, the law of armed conflict, international humanitarian law. We legitimately thought that was a valid target when we authorized that strike. We got it wrong. Right. So we just need to continue to learn from those situations. And
well, what would accountability even look like? At that level, accountability may look like, yeah, we got it wrong. And that's your accountability. It was an accident. We did not mean to do it. We did make this mistake, and we got it wrong. That might be as much accountability as you're going to get at that point in time. And people just need to learn to be okay with that, I suppose. And here you drop Clausewitz. Karl von Clausewitz's theories on war are widely accepted as dogma among the vast majority of military scholars. According to Clausewitz on war is the continuation of politics by other means. He describes war as a duel between two sides and goes on to define war as, quote, an act of force to compel an enemy to do our will. Clausewitz stated that this is the objective in the nature of war and that it is enduring and does not change. What changes is the character of war, how it is executed, and the weapons used, otherwise known as the means of war. Clausewitz recognized that the nature of humans and civilization to make advancements in technology and improvements in the weapons used in war, but ultimately the duel between two sides and the constant struggle to bend the enemy to our will does not change. And again, we've talked about that as we've had conversation. Yes, it changes things. Yes, these drone capabilities change the way things look. But at the end of the day, it's not going to change the fact that it's a continuation of political objective. All right. 304. Last one I got for you, the last excerpt I got. And and it really just dealing with the future. It's towards the end of the book and what the future looks like. I think we've said that it looks like drones. Looks like drones are going to be in the future. I think we've said that multiple times. But in your opinion, as far as what the services are doing now and what you I know you were removed a couple of years, but what you're seeing and what you're following through, um, what's the future look like, and what would you say? I'm not going to read them straight out of the book, but what would you say are some things, some best practices that the drone community should keep in mind when we're moving into this future?
Yeah, I would say the trends are that we're moving towards more and more autonomy, um, in air, land, sea domains, um, and we're doing that out of a necessity because the OODA loop, right? Everyone's familiar with the OODA loop. You've got to observe, orient, decide, and act faster than the enemy. And if your enemy is building autonomous systems that can identify targets and fire on you, then you need to be able to act inside of that loop in order to defeat them. And if you're trying to do that through a remotely operated or remotely controlled platform, such as an MQ9 Reaper these days, your decision making cycle is going to be uh, longer than your enemies. The more you automate, the faster your decision making cycle will be. So I think we will see more and more of that. Those kinds of systems deployed through manned and unmanned teaming, where you have somebody that's in charge of a fire team or a squad of unmanned systems, or wingmen if they're flying, and they send them forward to go do a specific task. Um, within a time and space restriction, where you can allow that sort of autonomy to occur. what I'm very cautious about, what I'm worried about, I guess, is if we get to the point where we have a lot of systems that become offensive in nature with autonomous target recognition, where the system makes the decision, one, that it positively identifies it as a legitimate target. That's probably the hardest part, because once you've made that determination without a human, once you've PID'd the target, it doesn't really matter if the human says engage it or not. So that the PID, I think, of yes, this is a valid military target, I think there has to be a human in there somewhere. That human could be in real time, or it could be in the planning stages, but somewhere you have to have human involvement that says these are your legitimate targets that you can engage.
Yeah, and how would a fully autonomous platform work? Let's say when we have a tick situation and they're supporting troops in contact. That's where I don't see it making. If you could send it out on a regular patrol and it could acquire positive identification and it could eliminate, like, that would be pretty awesome. I'm with you saying that we probably need to leave a human in that decision making process. But especially when you got guys like me on the ground and they're moving around and maneuvering on the enemy, or the enemy's maneuvering on them,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how it distinguishes one from the other if it's in a close tick like that. And I don't know if I would want it to. I feel like I would want the G2 of a human, and maybe that's just my ignorance and not understanding what they could provide algorithmically and autonomously. But yeah, that's one of those things. Moving around and you got close quarters fight going on. Then what? I don't know.
Yeah, I think there's systems that are built with autonomy do really well in well-defined environments, uh, where the outcome is fairly the same through repetition
So
and things like.
predictable.
Yeah, you have like a predictable outcome. Where autonomous systems don't do well is when you come into novel situations, like
Mm-hmm.
things that they haven't encountered before, and that's where humans are really good at identifying. This is a new situation, but I can determine what to do based off of what I know,
Mm-hmm.
and what I know should be done. Um, it's going to be the same with, self-driving cars,
Mm-hmm.
right? Self-driving cars, when they run into a novel situation that they've never encountered before, how are they going to do that? Like we've got to get past that point where they can navigate through all of those novel situations that you encounter on a daily basis when you're driving, right? Think of how much of your interaction driving is based off of, nonverbal communication with other drivers on the road. Like you pull up to a four-way stop and the person across from you got there before them, but or they got there before you, but they kind of give you the head nod or wave you through, right? How does an autonomous system navigate through that situation? How do they navigate through a tick situation where you have friendlies that are danger close to enemy? I don't know. I don't have those answers, but I mean, there's drones that can navigate indoors just using computer vision to avoid obstacles. They can navigate through a forest, with no human control. Yeah, we're there. It's just, what do we allow them to actually do? So
It read, understand it, especially you guys that are hitting still and going down range. Understand this book can give you a wealth of information. It gives you tons of dialogue from different interviewees that Wayne interviewed on kills, first kills, second kills, shift work, which is something that we didn't cover a whole lot of, which seemed to be a prominent thing that you continue to kind of harp on in here, is going in and out of shift work and in and out of a combat zone, essentially. If you're operating drones, if you're operating sensors, pick the book up, understand what the people came before you struggled with or struggle with still, and be better read in from how you can combat that coming up. Lieutenant Colonel Phelps, thanks again. I appreciate having you out. I appreciate you covering the book and being open to have the dialogue. And I appreciate the work that you put into it, because it's clearly well researched and well written. Definitely one of the better books and favorite books that I've read on the topic. So I appreciate you. And if you have any parting words, hit me.
Well, I appreciate you, Ryan, and I appreciate you, talking to veterans and folks, and just covering tough topics and having real conversations. These are the moments where people, listen and learn, and if I could touch just one person that's influenced in a positive way through this. You're doing it all the time, right? You're bringing folks on here and you're having those tough conversations. And if it helps somebody go get help that they need, or identify that their struggles are not unique, that there's folks out there that are going through the same thing. The community and the esprit de corps doesn't stop when you take the uniform off, right?
That's a fact.
It's semper fidelis, right? We're always faithful. So I really appreciate you reaching out to me and inviting me on here to discuss this today. It's been a lot of fun. So thank you.
Yes, sir. I appreciate it. And guys, till next time, it's choices, not chances.
Well, that concludes this episode. Thanks for listening to Choices Not Chances podcast. Please share, like, and subscribe wherever you listen or watch our podcast. You can also follow us on social media at Choices Not Chances podcast. Thanks, and have a great day.
Louisiana Gun Shop, your firearm headquarters, specializing in concealed carry guns, ammo, and training. You can get your Louisiana permit with us. Also a large selection of AR-15s, or if you are that build-it-yourself type of guy or gal, we have all the parts to build and customize your own AR-15. Glock, SIG, Taurus, Ruger. We have all the brands, both in the store or at LouisianaGunShop.com.
Not too far. You're marking a building. Hit him. Yeah, that's good. That's a good shot. That's money. Yeah.